Hello, everyone. Hi and howdy. Everyone's tuning in. Welcome to the Vote Save America 2024 Organizer Else Training Season. This is training number 1 in our series of 3. So if you are here to learn more about messaging guidance in 2024 in relational organizing, you're in the right place. If you are here by accident, just stick around. We're going to have a good time. And of course, introduce yourself in the chat. Share your Organizer Else team if you know that already, and we're gonna have a good time. Let's get started. So just a couple of community norms before. Here at VSA, of course, we love to support each other, especially as we learn and get trained up during this call. So let's keep that up tonight. We are gonna be streaming across a couple of platforms, YouTube and Instagram. And of course, no question is a bad question. So please do use the chat in your respective platform. And one of our very fast typing VSA team members will be behind the scenes responding as they can. And that being said, please don't spam the chat so we can see those questions. And of course, have fun or else, okay? We only have an hour, but here's the plan for tonight. We're going to quickly recap the Organizer Else program. Then we will set the scene for top-line messaging this year. And then we'll be joined by our friends at Navigator Research with an incredible presentation on a few of the top issues for 2024. Then Mr. Dan Pfeiffer, you know him, and a VSA super volunteer, Miss Sarah Danver, will hop on with Navigator for a panel discussion on all of the above. Finally, we'll connect everything to relational organizing with a Q&A with Trent Seubert from DTRIP, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, to talk about the relational program. Amazing. We've got a lot to do. So in case you missed it, we kicked off our strategy to win last week with Organizer Else. We are going to be volunteering in target races from coast to coast, up and down the ballot. We ended up splitting the country kind of down the middle into Team East and Team West to see who among us can make and take the most action. We're going to be funneling that team energy into dozens of target races. Think state Supreme Courts, flipping House seats, ballot measures. We originally were going to do this across 24 states, but it's actually 25 now. That's an update. Arkansas, we're looking at you for your ballot initiative to protect abortion rights. Hell yeah, we're glad to add that to the docket. So that may sound like a lot, though, 25 states, but you know, it's meant to be far-reaching, this strategy, but it's also meant to be flexible. So we may be shifting efforts here and there. Keep an eye out. But yeah, we have events from strategic partners lined up, ready to go. I think most of y'all here are signed up for the program already. If you're not, you'll see below me ticking votesaveamerica.com/2024. That's how you're going to sign up. But we need you now to sign up to take action. You're getting weekly emails. This week's email is going to land in your inbox tomorrow morning. Definitely check your spam just in case. But sending emails to thousands of people can get tricky. That's why we also have our VSA Slack. Join it. That's where you will find the weekly events, as well as a ton of other volunteer opportunities and a lot of fun as well. So you'll see the link below me, votesaveamerica.com/team to join that. Now, almost every volunteer action we're going to send y'all to comes with some sort of training beforehand, but this training series is more broadly applicable to all of the events you're going to take action with. So don't wait till the end. Sign up for a phone bank or a Canvas or a text bank now. Our partners need ya, okay? But yeah, again, you'll find the link to sign up below me. Send it to 10 friends while you're at it. Why not? All right, tonight's mission, we're going to get a handle on messaging for 2024, and we're going to understand and get pumped for relational organizing. We often use messaging. We always use messaging in every volunteer action. It's threaded into all of our conversations. But of course, our partner orgs and the specific campaigns we're going to have y'all work with will have their own specific talking points. But again, tonight, will help broadly bolster those points and guide us, especially in conversations that we're going to just have loosey-goosey kind of with our friends and family. Hint, hint, that's relational organizing, folks, but that's for later. For now, training season just started. It's not over. Sorry, Dua Lipa. Tonight, we're setting the tone for our organizing this year. We have more in store next week. After Memorial Day, May 28th, we have our second training. Highlights will include how to make a hard ask and how to structure your personal story with an activity with amazing political strategist Christian Woods. And then we have a final training on June 3rd, where we'll make sure you're prepared to canvas and phone bank, 2 things that we need everyone here to do this year. All right, let's get to it. There's a lot of messaging to do, and there's a very, very large messaging landscape to cover. It encompasses so much this year. As always, we're talking healthcare, we're talking cost of living, we're talking the current climate crisis, and much more. But nothing necessarily can be left unsaid because, an issue's an issue for a reason, right? It matters to people. But yeah, that's why there's a ton to cover. And we can't necessarily control the amount. We can't control the polls. We can't control the media, but we can control a few things. We can control when and how we take action, by talking to voters like real people, by talking to our friends and family like voters. We can also really control where we support and invest in, especially in our down ballot races, to really fight for those crucial numbers that we need to win power in the House, in other state bodies, and of course, to build long-lasting civic education and engagement. That's what we're trying to do this year for sure. Now, when we are thinking of messaging, we often think of, and always think of, I would assume, the media, the news. It also encompasses a lot of things. Of course, TV, podcasts. That's why a ton of us are here, I would assume. Social media, digital media, print media, all of that stuff. But 2024, at this point, people simply just don't follow the news and the media like they might have in the past. They just don't do it. It's those of us tuning in who, follow politics, who follow political messaging versus kind of everyone else who don't. And honestly, they have better things to do. They have lives to live, so we understand. But the current fractured media environment definitely makes it harder for those to follow. And that ends up leading to media diets so extremely personalized and just generally non-traditional. Another factor adding to this, situation is that people are increasingly, and rightfully so, more skeptical of not just the media, but of the politicians and the campaigns asking for their vote. But that means now in 2024, guys, we're the media. As volunteers, we have the power now more than ever to really make a difference in sharing messaging and making messaging come across. It's, again, increasingly hard for campaigns to reach voters in the traditional ways that they are used to. So volunteers doing this work, talking person to person, is not just going to be an extra thing. It's going to be the thing to push our wins for democracy over the edge. We now have that responsibility to talk to not just the voters in our lives, but also in the direct actions we're going to be taking. We're going to be talking about the positive progress that we've made, contrasted with the pretty bad, terrible things MAGA extremism has done and will continue to do. Now, it's not just a rerun this time around. There are hundreds of elections happening. We're not just organizing for the White House, not even just for 2024. We are in the business of organizing for our future that we want to continue to organize in, right? So in all of our conversations and all of our actions, we need to connect our real daily lives to the progress made that will then indicate hope for that future's future, right? Of course, after the voters vote and after we win. So we're just not fixing democracy. Just kidding. We are fixing democracy. We're not just simply defending it as it is. This is a long-term situation. We're not done after 2024. But that also means that it's time to relinquish control in how messaging traditionally gets to voters. Again, we are now the trusted messengers to the people that we need to win over as voters. The double haters, the ticket splitters, that sort of thing. Of course, these voters are not a monolith, but people in general are more motivated by their networks. And not only that, but you're the trusted messenger to your friends for a reason, not just because you're friends, but they know you and they know your values. So when you're talking to them, really do look for ways to lead with a shared value whenever possible. You may have heard the framing values, villain, vision. You'll see below me, that's going to come up next week for training number 2. So go ahead and sign up if you haven't already at the link below, and we will do a deep dive on values, villain, vision. All right, so let's take a dive into the top issues. To help us navigate those issues, though, we have some very amazing people, some of our friends here from Navigator Research presenting today. They are the public opinion research collective to help us progressives better understand the views on current issues. So we're grateful to have them on board and to hear their expertise and all of the work that they've been doing. So please welcome to the stage. We have Brian Bennett, Senior Director of Polling and Analytics, and Ian Smith, Director of Polling and Analytics at where are we? Navigator Research, guys. Welcome to the stage, folks.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And we're going to walk through a presentation. It's going to be about 15 minutes. The first thing I want to note is if you do like what you see in this presentation and you are interested in learning more about our findings, we put out a newsletter regularly. You can scan that QR code that's on this slide right here, and it'll take you to a landing page where you can sign up for our newsletter, or you can follow us on Twitter or Instagram. But to get started, to explain what is Navigator. Navigator Research is a public opinion project aimed at understanding the political and economic landscape that we find ourselves in for the purpose of supporting issue advocacy. We then try to understand what words, language, arguments, and frames are the most effective to help progressive advocates on any number of issues. We conduct regular national surveys every few weeks, diving into topics like reproductive rights and freedoms, the state of our democracy, and economic justice, among many other issues. We're going to focus on those issues in this particular presentation, but we have plenty of other findings and research and guidance on a lot of other different topics. So I'm going to start this presentation off with talking a lot about some of the findings that we found from reproductive rights and freedoms in particular, because of ever since the Dobbs decision was leaked in 2022, and then the Supreme Court actually overturned Roe versus Wade, we've done a sustained and significant amount of research on the issues of abortion and a lot of things related to it as the attacks have kind of kept coming through. Obviously there's lots of Supreme Court decisions that I'll kind of talk a little bit about, the attacks on abortion medication, on IVF. So I'm going to walk through a few of those slides. I think the first thing to really kind of keep in mind is where the country starts is that 2 in 3 Americans say that they are pro-choice on the issue of abortion. And an even larger share say that the government should stay out of the decision that should be between a patient and their doctor. That means that there are a lot of independents and even about half of Republicans who describe themselves as being pro-choice, which means that just as a starting point, this is an issue where there's going to be a lot of conflicted voters who are out of step with the position of Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress. There are a couple of Supreme Court decisions that are going to be coming down in the next few weeks that I think are important to kind of keep in mind as these issues may become relevant and more salient issues for a significant number of voters. The first is on the issue of early abortion medication. One kind of very easy finding to begin with is we've tested things like favorability of the concept of early abortion medication versus the actual drug like mifepristone. And one of the things that's important is it's important to kind of talk about the concept at a high level. Majority of Americans are favorable towards early abortion medication, and no one's really heard of mifepristone. So that's kind of one important thing to keep in mind. And also, we've found that not just a majority, but a growing majority in our tracking, it's actually increased over time, who support keeping early medication abortion legal. Ever since the Alabama Supreme Court overturned or came down with a decision that effectively banned IVF in the state, we also have done some research on the issue of in vitro fertilization. And we found that similar shares, even higher, about 70%, actually support making it easier or having a national law that protects families' ability to use IVF to have children. And this is maybe one of the most important points, is that we've done a lot of testing of how to kind of frame Republicans in Congress and Republicans generally when it comes to the issue of abortion. And in this particular context, it was in the context of IVF, but kind of relates to what we've seen across a lot of our research, which is that there's basically 2 kind of key arguments that kind of over and over again really kind of become central to the debate that are really helpful for progressives to be making. The first is that the decision to have an abortion should be between the patient and the doctor, not between politicians and the government. Extremely effective, kind of mirrors that slide that I showed at the very beginning. The other is that that this is kind of part and parcel of the extremist agenda that Republicans have been continuing to push. And that this is like basically anytime that there are these kinds of things that are so out of step, and tying them to a extremist agenda is very important. Not only are these two arguments about Republicans seen as concerning to over 3 in 5 Americans, nearly 2 in 3, but particularly among those double haters that Lauren mentioned, those who are unfavorable to both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. These concerns about the way that Republicans in Congress have comported themselves are seen as even more concerning among that group. Another Supreme Court decision that's going to be coming out is over the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which many of you may not have heard of. And also, no one else in America has heard of what's sometimes referred to as EMTALA. What we found in our research is that it's really not worth trying to explain EMTALA. It's really important to talk about life-saving medical care. And the whole premise of EMTALA is that it gives doctors the ability to perform medical or emergency abortions in the case where a patient's life is in danger. So important to talk about life-saving medical care, and even giving just a little bit of context about what EMTALA actually is, rather life-saving emergency care. We find that 3 in 4 Americans support keeping this on the books, and I would expect that if the Supreme Court takes decisions or makes a decision to take this off the books, it would be something that would be extremely devastating. And we saw the Supreme Court's favorability decline significantly after Roe was overturned. So finally, just to wrap up here, there's a few kind of key lessons on things to say versus not to say. So say medication abortion instead of mifepristone, say life-saving care instead of stabilizing care, and really emphasize that the decision should be between a patient and their doctor. I'm going to turn it over to Ian, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the findings from our economic research.
Thanks, Brian. So as organizers, we know when we get to the doors, we're going to have a lot of conversations, but a lot of them are going to be about the economy, especially how folks are feeling right now in their personal economies. They're going to want answers here. And I would say the two best pillars, or the two strongest pillars of Democratic messaging here in this moment, are two things. What are we doing right now to lower costs, and what are our fundamental policies here? As you're going to see on this slide, they're important on their face. Second is, what are we doing to make sure that the wealthy and big corporations are paying their fair share in taxes to not only reduce the tax burden on normal working class people, but also to pay for things that we need, like Social Security, Medicare, and other extremely popular programs, right? So keeping those two pillars in mind will give us a good foundation to kind of move forward with our economic messaging. If we can go back one slide, sorry. So in the first pillar, right, what are we doing to bring down costs? Like, this is the first worry of folks. Extending the $35 a month cap on insulin prices, expanding the number of prescription drugs Medicare can negotiate for. That is kind of like directly getting to lower costs, amongst plenty others, but those are kind of some of the most salient examples. And we don't really even need to message on those and kind of educate folks. On their face, those are popular. As we can see, 80+% support. And then we get to our tax fairness policy, the second pillar, closing tax loopholes on big pharma, big oil, and wealthy corporations, and raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans to protect Social Security and Medicare. Again, over 70% support on both. So that's our foundation here, and we'll kind of break that out a little bit more as we go. Making sure big corporations, billionaires and big corporations specifically, is kind of like the phrase that we like to use, pay their fair share. That's very important. Pay their fair share in taxes is extremely popular. 63% support across the electorate, by a 38-point margin. Folks would support increasing the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. And that's kind of, we'll see later in a couple of slides, that's kind of getting into the nitty gritty. All you really have to say as an organizer, unless somebody specifically asks, is making sure that the wealthy and big corporations are paying their fair share. And then when you add that language there, while even including the kind of wonky tax number for the corporate tax rate, you bump up your support by 8% among the electorate to 68%. If we go to the next slide. Another language distinction when we're talking about this fair share and tax fairness language, which again is extremely popular, is the distinction between raising taxes on billionaires and big corporations and closing tax loopholes. And a lot of the movement you see here is actually coming from Republicans. I saw some questions in the YouTube chat about, does this kind of translate to more liberal and more conservative states? And we see that it does here across the board, right? So for raising taxes on billionaires and big corporations, I want to start with the raising taxes language is popular, right? Tax fairness is popular, again, by itself. But when you say we want to close tax loopholes, it really strikes at that fairness vein and pulls Republicans along with us. If we see at the bottom of this slide, we go from a -5 net favorability of raising taxes on billionaires and big corporations to a 41-point positive rating on closing tax loopholes for billionaires and big corporations. So if you really want that Big Tent and you really want to get kind of energy around this issue, closing tax loopholes will give you a little bit more. And we kind of see that itemized here on the next slide. Thank you. Closing tax loopholes for corporations that ship jobs overseas. Taxing corporations more if they pollute. And kind of the big story of this slide, you'll see these slides sent to you later, is that getting to kind of tangible benefits or tangible reasons that these companies should be taxed instead of kind of for the bottom 3 points while still getting support. They're a little bit less popular. Instead of getting into the exact corporate tax rates and percentages and losing folks there, talk about the big why. We're closing tax loopholes on corporations that are shipping job overseas. We're taxing corporations more if they pollute so much that the government has to pay to clean it up. We're not really getting into the nitty gritty here saying we want to increase the corporate tax rate to 28%. We do get support there, but you really get you're really painting the picture for folks at the doors when you tell the big story instead of getting to the specifics. If we go to the next slide. When we talk about the Republicans' plan for taxes, specifically the Trump tax cuts that they want to extend in 2025, when you just give folks the Trump tax cuts and don't explain what they're doing, the Trump tax cuts actually have a net favorability of 3% here, with 47% support among battleground voters specifically. But that's easily combated. If we go to the next slide, just explaining what's going on here. The Trump tax cuts, the Republican tax plan, is adding $3.5 trillion to the deficit, giving wealthy foreign investors tax breaks, and allowing 55 corporations to pay $0 in federal income taxes. That changes the net favorability by 43%, from a +3 favorability to a -40% opposition to the Trump tax cuts. So when we really frame them, and again, using that big picture language, right? Do you want 55 large corporations to pay $0 in income tax next year? Do you want to give a tax break of $24 billion to wealthy foreign investors and big corporations? No, right? And that simple language kind of frames that Republican policy in a way that's very digestible and understandable for folks, just getting to brass tacks. And again, we're kind of itemizing the the most concerning items of the Republican tax plan. Record-breaking tax breaks to the wealthiest individuals, a tax plan that gives the wealthiest and big corporations a tax cut while making middle-class families pay more in taxes, and 83% of the benefits going to the top 1% of Americans. So again, we see that these are all very concerning, all perform similarly, and again, the big picture here is to focus on the big picture. When we think about where folks are right now and how costs are the largest concern and what you're going to hear as the main concern on the doors, most likely from an economic standpoint, when you're talking to your colleagues, voters, etc., you hear about inflation as the issue. And there's several kind of vectors of blame for inflation. One that's kind of not talked about are corporate price gouging. And overall, 59% of voters in America think that corporate greed is a major cause of inflation and rise of prices, and corporations are being greedy and raising prices to make profits, right? Inflation doesn't happen in a vacuum. Corporations being greedy is some of the cause for inflation. Inflation is just a measure of how much corporations and companies are charging for everyday goods, and that's being recorded, right? So these companies have control over it, and I think giving that information to the folks on the doors is important, right? None of this happens in a vacuum, but corporations and corporate greed are to blame for some of the inflation that we're seeing. And across the board, that is believable, digestible. Again, to that question about does this work in liberal or conservative states, our Republican colleagues agree as well. So to wrap it up, what are we talking about? Again, the two pillars. We are wanting to make costs go down, right? So we're going to talk about our current policies working on that, insulin cost, capping, allowing Medicare to negotiate the prices of drugs, bringing costs down, the Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera, kind of closing that awareness gap. And we're talking about closing the tax loopholes for billionaires and big corporations in a moment where they're making more record profits than ever and charging us more to produce those record profits than ever, right? And again, the Trump tax cuts, they're just a tax cut for the wealthy and big corporations. And keep it simple. Give them that big picture. And we win them on the economy.
Awesome.
Pass it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes. I know we're running a little bit low on time. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about some of the research that we've done on democracy and in particular on January 6th. One thing that I think is really important to kind of keep in mind is that, obviously in 2020, Donald Trump tried to overthrow the government. That's like a thing that happened. And there's still a lot of extremely huge concern about political violence. More than 4 in 5 Americans describe themselves as being concerned about political violence in the U.S. today. And it's a cross-partisan issue. It's not just Democrats or independents. It's also Republicans who are concerned about it as well. And an interesting thing, we kind of did this exercise where we basically gave respondents a lot of examples of political violence and asked them whether they thought it was an example of political violence or not. And obviously January 6th was kind of the top tier concern up there with the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan and the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, whereas the other things like the BLM protests in 2020 and were less seen as examples of political violence. We did this this is a complicated slide, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But one of the reasons why I wanted to show it is that there are a lot of people in the country today who are what we call democracy non-prioritizers. These are people who oppose the actions of what happened on January 6th and are concerned that another January 6th could happen again, but do not put democracy as one of their top 4 issues. They usually say jobs in the economy or inflation or healthcare or Social Security, Medicare, but they are very deeply activated to some degree by what happened on January 6th. And it's one of the things that we've seen in a lot of our qualitative research is that a lot of people, especially those who are kind of the disengaged or less engaged people that Lauren was talking about at the beginning of the call, are kind of either forgetting or don't have the kind of the details of what happened on January 6th top of mind. And so I think it's really important to try to reach that 47% of the public and remind them about what Donald Trump did on January 6th. We've also found that this is from research that we did earlier this year that 3 in 4 still oppose what happened on January 6th. And we kind of did like a little bit of a deep dive in like what are the most important and concerning things to remind people about. And we also asked them on kind of 2 axes. One is how concerning do you find these things to be about what happened on January 6th? The other is, do you think that this actually did happen on January 6th? To make sure we had kind of understood that credibility piece. And the elements that we found that were the most important to kind of emphasize were that more than 2,000 rioters broke into the Capitol, approximately 140 police officers resulted, 5 people died, including police officers, and that more than 1,000 people had been arrested for crimes related to January 6th. So when you're kind of talking about and reminding people about the threat and specter of political violence, those are kind of the pieces of what happened on January 6th that kind of strike a chord with a lot of Americans. So with that, I will turn it back over to Lauren.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. Wow, that was a lot. I'm going to let y'all take a little breather as we introduce a couple of other really fun people. Don't worry, you'll see more of Brian and Ian in just a second, but it's time for a panel party. Obviously, all of that info that they just broke down, all that polling analysis is so important. So now it's really time to make a connection, make that, connection to our actual organizing conversations with a discussion with Dan Pfeiffer, you know him, PSA co-host, writer of the Message Box newsletter, also, hey, Team East captain. Sorry, we are biased over here. I'm also on Team East. Sorry, guys. And we also have Sarah Danver joining us with this panel, one of our longtime super volunteers, VSA moderator. If you're in the Slack, you've seen her around. Yeah, this is exciting. Let me add everyone to the stage so we can all get to chatting. All right, we've got Dan, we've got Sarah, we have Brian, and we have Ian. And let me get rid of this. What's up, everyone? How are we?
Hi, Lauren. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Okay,
Hello.
Beautiful. So yeah, we don't have a ton of time. We could honestly sit on this panel and talk for 2 more hours, but let's just dive in. I'm going to just ask everyone specific questions, and then we'll kind of like chat and have fun later. Okay, so we just heard from Brian and Ian on a few of the big issues, top 3 big buckets. There was a lot there to parse through, but Dan, we'll start with you. So in a recent episode of PSA that you hosted with Alyssa, I believe, you all talked about the importance of framing a lot of the accomplishments, specifically obviously Dem ones, with contrast. So accomplishments of what we've done and contrasting that with Trump and the mini Trumps of the world. So let's start with economy, right? That's kind of the number one for us.
Yep.
What is the contrast that you would, share that is worth surfacing for volunteers who are going to be talking to people they know about voting this year?
Sure. I think first I would just encourage everyone who is on this call, who is having conversations with voters in their lives, to sign up for the Navigator email list, where you're going to get incredibly valuable information on a regular basis. So it is an essential tool for me in everything I do. And so I would encourage everyone to do it. What I think here is we have to understand just how essential the economy is in this race. And I'm going to use a non-Navigator poll to make this point, which is in the New York Times Siena Battleground poll. You had 3/4 of voters who said that the economy was either fair or poor. You had 30% of voters who said the economy was the single most important issue in deciding their vote. That is more than double any other issue. And the only 2 other issues that reached double digits were abortion and immigration. And those trends are even more prevalent among the voters in our coalition that we're losing. You have 9 in 10 voters under 30 in that poll who say that the economy is fair or poor. You have 8 in 10 Hispanic voters, 77% of Black voters. And so this is the ball game right here, right? And Donald Trump in that poll, and we've seen similar, this is not the exact question they ask in Navigator, but Donald Trump has a 20-point advantage on Biden on the economy. So we have to narrow that gap. And based in large part on what I've always believed that the questions of the economy, sometimes as Democrats, we are eggheads and we think about it in terms of that voters care about the policies that we put forward. And they do care, but they're not like stacking up the white papers and deciding who has the most white papers that we agree with. Economic messaging is a proxy for a more important question, which is, who is this candidate going to fight for? Are they going to fight for someone like me? They're going to fight for someone else. Republicans want to make that question be, they're going to fight for poor people, freeloaders, immigrants, et cetera. And the truth here is, and not that there's anything wrong with any of that, but the truth here is that Republicans are going to, and Donald Trump in particular, are going to fight for rich people and powerful corporations, not you, right? And so all the messaging that they had in there about Donald Trump extending these tax cuts for the overwhelming benefit of the wealthy corporations, that he's going to pay for those tax cuts by cutting Social Security and Medicare and repealing the Affordable Care Act. Like, that is the crux, because that tells a story about who Joe Biden is and who Donald Trump is. Like, who is Joe Biden fighting for? He's taking on powerful special interests to help lower your costs, especially your cost of prescription drugs. Donald Trump, if he gets in office, is going to help rich people and corporations. And so it's like, that's the story.
That it's a long story, but it's a story for sure. But yeah, I especially, like you were just talking about, I really did love, Brian and Ian, what y'all shared, like the difference in language when talking about how Republicans have that specific role in not just raising taxes on wealthy, but closing tax loopholes on the wealthy and the corporations and making sure that they're doing it right now, right? So that specificity is really important. Great. So it's not always super fun to talk about, what Republicans are doing, because it's often bad. So Sarah, this one's for you. As a super volunteer, you've organized, you've taken a lot of action and had a lot of conversations with folks. So while we obviously need to make these contrasts and talk about, the pro versus the con, often the most effective conversations we have with voters at the doors, on the phones, tend to end on a positive note, or we try and keep it positive, right? So, how do you navigate those conversations, be it listening, pivoting, whatever it is, on issues and messaging that may not be super fun to talk about, I guess?
Yeah, it's hard. It's funny. People in my personal life would find it really funny that I'm getting this question, because when I was growing up, I was what one might call strident or opinionated, depending on how you were talking about it. And my parents are in the audience; they can tell you what's the right word. But so just know that everything I say from now on is hard-won knowledge. So one thing I like to remind folks when talking about phone banking or canvassing, or even just talking to friends and family, is that how to do this. You know how to have a conversation. You do it all the time. And the things that work best in these conversations that you're having on the doors or on the phones are the same things that work best when you're talking to your friends. Things like listening, active listening, things like not, being curious, asking questions. I always think about the Ted Lasso quote, be curious, not judgmental. These issues can be really distressing, and the conversations can be really fraught, but showing genuine curiosity will really help get to the heart of what people are worried about. And once you're there, once you can address that genuine worry and talk about what Democrats are doing to fight for you, and then come back to things that we have in common, come back to places where we do have a shared value, or we have a shared story, or we have a shared interest. And then I think always just ending on a note that empowers the voter, by voting in this election, you can make a difference. You can make these policies happen. It's always a great way to turn it back around in a positive way.
It's that pivot that we love, the positive pivot. No, that's good to hear. And strident Sarah, it makes sense. I love that. Amazing. Okay, so Brian, Ian, back to y'all. Thank you again, by the way, for that presentation, for all of that, piecing together all of your work. Obviously, we can see as much that a lot of your work does lie in the numbers and in the weeds and in the graphs. So we really do appreciate the ability to kind of absorb it in a real way that we can understand. So, the accomplishments and contrast framework, what would y'all, want to add to that framework that we're going to be kind of bringing into a lot of our conversations? Imagining I'm talking to a voter who does care about all of the issues that y'all discuss with us on some sort of equal level. So, if you can, what in your way, or what in your view, would you tell a volunteer to kind of try and tie all of these issues together? Is there a common thread there, I guess, is my main question.
Ian, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. First, I would say, to Dan's point, I would focus on our strengths here. When you ask voters who is better on the economy as a broad concept, they will say Republicans are better on the economy. They're thinking about the stock market. They're thinking about kind of the Fed. But when you ask voters who is looking out for people like me, who's more worried about increasing my wages and my spending power, Democrats do pop up there as kind of the champions of those issues and of the person. And I think that our volunteers can be the extension of that. The reason why we talk about personal stories when we're at the door is because you're presenting yourself, right? And you're making a connection with the person in front of you. So let's think about where that person's at, right? 57% of people say they're struggling to save on this paycheck and maybe won't be able to save on the next paycheck, right? So how can we addressed costs in a way that help them. People are very tied and their parents are relying on Social Security and Medicare. How can we kind of comfort those folks with, I mean, it sounds like callous, but not saying tax policy, but letting them know that we're there for them for those issues, right? So I think the most important thing is to talk to the persons in front of you, see what they're worried about, and try to do your best to let them know that we're there for them, because they believe that. They just need to hear it out there on those doors.
Yeah, and I would just add a couple of things. One is, one of the things that we've seen test so popularly in our research, it tends to focus on even just even it can be large things, but even small incremental things that can really help people's buying power. I think that's why we've seen things like junk fees, and the Biden administration trying to address junk fees test so well. Even something like reducing credit card late fees, or from $41 to $8. That's $33 that's suddenly back in people's pocket. And that actually materially matters right now. We've obviously seen things like the insulin cap and capping the amount of money that seniors have to pay for health insurance premiums from the Inflation Reduction Act. That's, again, healthcare continues to be a huge issue for a lot of people, and particularly seniors. And so I think those are important pieces of it. But I also think that the tax pieces and who is benefiting at the expense of those who are suffering is a critical part of the narrative. I mean, what Ian showed on the Trump tax cuts, I think it's a huge warning sign that right now in the battleground, I think generally speaking across the country, that extending the Trump tax cuts is basically a neutral thing. But we also know from what happened in 2017 and 2018, we have a real world experiment of they passed a $2 trillion tax cut that overwhelmingly went to the wealthy. And you know what happened to the popularity of that tax cut law? It got worse and worse and worse over time, to the point where Republicans weren't even campaigning on taxes in the midterms that they lost. And so I think making those kind of central arguments, while also talking about the various policy pieces where it can have an incremental impact on people's costs, is you have to kind of do both, I think.
There's lots to do. You have to do both at the same time. But with practice, we'll figure it out, I think. Amazing. Okay, so back to you, Dan. So Organizer Else, VSA's program this year, we are having, one of our major priorities is targeting and investing in down ballot races. So could you help us sort of thread these points we're talking about into how to navigate talking about more localized issues? Obviously, yes, we will have talking points from whatever specific campaign. But again, knowing that we all can't be walking encyclopedias, everything experts, you got any tips for us to kind of thread all of these through?
Yeah, in terms of why down ballot candidates matter.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually think that talking about local elections is going to be much easier than talking about national elections this cycle. And I think because people are going to feel more connected to the actual results. There's plenty of polling that shows that this is perhaps the most cynical political environment we've ever existed in. And the closer you get to the closer in proximity to the people's lives, the less the cynicism is going to weigh in there. And so, you can have specific issues to talk about those people, but ultimately, I think it's what Sarah said, is that your vote can make the difference, right? And the smaller the election is, some of these races come down to a tiny handful of votes, and empowering people to make a real difference. And I think there is a way also to connect national issues to local issues, right? If abortion is an issue of top priority to a voter, their state matters as much, if not more, than their federal vote, right? I mean, it is in these state levels where these laws are being made right now under the world we live in, because Roe v. Wade was overturned. And even if you were in a state that has a blue governor today, you may not have a Democratic governor next time, or a Democratic legislator next time, and they will pass laws like what they tried to pass in Arizona, what they passed in Florida, all over the country. That can happen to you. On issues of healthcare, whether your state accepts Medicaid funding from the Affordable Care Act will determine whether millions of those people in your state have access to healthcare. Gun safety laws, more of them are going to pass at state level than federal level. And so there are two ways to do this. One is to help people understand the value of their vote is even more consequential when you have more leverage at the lower level. But even these national issues you care about are actually being decided at the local level. Democracy, right? The people who are going to count the votes and certify the elections are the people who are running for job titles you may never even have thought of in some states, right? Recorders of deeds in some states are the ones who are going to matter here. And so having, it's going to be different in every state, it's going to be different in every race, but like bringing it down to an understandable level that the voter has the power to make a real difference on issues they care about in their lives from a simple race that could have a turnout of a few thousand people, I think is critically important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those margins, the more local you get, the more margins are so small. But that's also really cool. Like you said, that's where the power lies, and we're in it to win it. That's what we're here for. Next question back to you, Sarah. So, like we just mentioned, talking points, we're going to get them. And more later in the next training about how to really make those talking points into your voice. But for now, Sarah, say, you've been talking to someone, politics comes up. How do you really think through not just navigating talking points? We're just talking to your friend, but navigating through connecting over a shared value that you both have, right? So not just remembering a positive win in real time, not just thinking about a contrast of what could and should be, because we don't want to sound robotic or preachy or repetitive. So tell us your ways. Also, have you had a conversation like this recently? Just in approaching conversations outside of action that we're going to be taking.
Yeah, somehow I find that this happens to me a lot. So in 2020, the weekend before the whole world shut down, I ended up in an Uber with an Obama-Trump driver. Like, he was an Obama Trump voter who really loved Obama, but liked what Trump had done on the economy and was liked that he was a businessman shaking things up. And so being able to go to her and be like, actually, Trump got an $1 million loan from his dad to start his business. Do you know what I could have done? Do you know what you could have done with $1 million? And that really, I saw it click in her eyes at 6 o'clock in the morning on the way to the airport. Wow, yeah, Trump isn't like me. And I had another conversation with a coworker earlier today because she had been hanging out with her son and his friends, and one of the friends was not voting, and she had this exact question of I don't have the facts and figures to make this convincing argument. What do I do in this situation? I really liked what Ian was saying during the Navigator Research training about telling the big story, or even what Dan was saying about the stacks of white papers. And not Shinker Osorio, who's another great messenger, has a great quote where she's like, if we were going to fact check our way out of this, we would have done it already. I think anytime that you're having these conversations, really just trying to get to the heart of what that person's concern is, and then tying it back to your own concern. So my coworker is a former librarian. She has a lot of friends still in the libraries who are really, really afraid of being arrested for the books that they're putting on display in libraries. Her son is gay. The Supreme Court is already kind of looking at readdressing gay marriage, this kind of universal thing, much like abortion. We could wake up tomorrow and not have that right anymore. And so really being able to talk to somebody about where their concerns are, say that you hear them, say that you hear where they're coming from, and then relate it back to something that is passionate, that you're passionate about, something that impacts your life. Because at the end of the day, what you really want is them to know that somebody they respect, somebody they love, somebody that they care about, somebody that they see all the time is also tied into this in the way that they feel in their hearts. Because everybody feels really, really impacted by this. And everybody can touch politics in a really real way. And so if you can just make sure that that comes back to where you are, you guys can relate on that level, and you can have the conversation. And then you just have to not be afraid to talk about it. It is going to be hard. It's going to be a little scary sometimes, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then you'll find yourself in an Uber on the way to the South Carolina airport, hearing about, Trump's business excitement. So
amazing. A lot of these convos happen in Ubers. I was surprised at first too, but you're right. It does just takes practice. You just gotta, get a conversation in and keep going. Amazing. I'm really sad we have not enough time to talk to all of you, but a quick rapid fire for fun, just to keep things on a positive note, remember? So someone did this on a crooked social media. Dan, I think you already have an answer for this, but if you were to sum up your personal campaign slogan, campaign messaging, if you have a slogan, can you share it with us? Have you thought about this before? If you can't think of a slogan, maybe there's a walk-up song that encompasses your personal campaign messaging if you were to run, who's ready? I know it's hard because it could be so many different things.
I'll go first since I've done this before.
Amazing.
And so I already have my answer, which was mine was obviously Yes We Dan was going to be my slogan.
Fabulous. Easy to remember. Yes, we Dan. Fab.
I have to admit, one of my proclivities that I feel like I should be held accountable for is I absolutely love the Fast and Furious franchise.
Yes.
And so mine's got to be Ride or Die.
It's not going to be Live Your Life a Quarter Mile at a Time.
No, Dan, that's going to be mine now because
Okay, go
I'm
for
also
it.
a huge Fast and Furious fan.
Yes.
So yeah, it's Live a Quarter Mile at a Time, obviously.
Yeah.
Brian and I are running together. It's a ticket.
Yes.
It's a ticket I love. Ian, how about you?
Ooh, this is tough. I would say that I honestly don't know. I don't know. I don't really have an answer off the top of my head, but something about empowering us to help you help yourself, right? Like we're not out here giving out handouts. We want you to be able to help yourself. We want you to be able to live decently. So a phrase, a little bit of a waffle.
Ian's a data-oriented guy. He's not just going to spout off a slogan. He's going to test it first, and then he'll come back with the right one.
You're right.
You
also
go.
had the most earnest, best summation of this conversation. So
it's like you planned it. I know you didn't, but oh my God. Okay, well, let's end on Ian's really lovely note. Thank you so much, guys, and be on the lookout. There's a slide that all of you Fast and Furious friends are gonna love in just a second. But again, thank you so much. I'm kicking y'all off the screen and we're gonna move on. But thanks. We'll talk to all of y'all soon. Bye, Dan. Okay, it's time to keep moving. Again, I could talk to these people for hours, but we have some messaging pros. The way that we're gonna stay in touch about all the stuff we've been talking about, obviously we're gonna listen to some podcasts. That's how we do. But as mentioned in the kickoff call and earlier, I guess, we also have our VSA Slack. That's where these conversations are going to continue. That's where we're also going to be sharing the Navigator deck that they just shared. We also often will have discussions on Dan's message box, his newsletter. You know, Sarah's there also. You got to join. So go to that link, votesaveamerica.com/team. That's where we are going to be talking more about messaging all the time. But it's time to move on. Let's talk relational organizing. Okay, so we call it relational. It's essentially just simply good organizing in your communities. Relational organizing is reaching out to the people you already know and mobilizing them to vote or, register to vote or volunteer, whatever it can be. It can often complement a ton of other actions that we take. And they're threaded into everything that we do. But a big reason why people are kind of talking about relational a lot, kind of like we mentioned, big shift in how media and campaigns operate. The shift is also really evident in the use of public to private internet. There's this break between where places consume media and messaging and then places where people talk to their friends about this stuff. So it's not just enough to send a link. We want to think about our organizing, of course, as long-term, but also in a distributed sense. That's what we're here for. So we want to reach our people. We want to tune them into what we are listening in on and get them to vote and volunteer. Because when they do so, they feel that lives can be changed for the better, especially if they care about yours, right? All right, but who are we reaching with relational organizing? Who are we engaging? It's just not as simple as the people in your immediate circle. It's not just your family and friends. And I know some of us often say, we've also probably heard this before, everyone I know is already voting. Well, folks, that's just not true. It just really isn't. If it somehow is think of it more of a snowball effect, right? So you provide the example to your people, and then they engage their networks and so on and so forth. There's exponential growth in politically engaging folks. It's really freaking cool. But yeah, of course, relational also looks like getting folks to volunteer. And that's something that we are going to have you all do for Organizer Else. So figure out who your people are. And then next comes figure out how to talk to them. Get creative, call, text, in person. And there's the 4 major steps: make a list of who, decide the how, make the ask, and follow up. I know that was a fairly brief intro, but we thankfully have a pro on relational organizing ready to discuss the mechanics and just speak on the 2024 program that they have. So we have Trent Seubert, the National Distributed Director for DTRIP. That means Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They are one of VSA's partners dedicated to electing Democrats to the House of Representatives, which we know is going to be really freaking important this year. Hey, Trent, how are you?
Hey, how's it going? Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Amazing. So thanks for hopping on. And let's just get to know each other. Can you just share a bit about kind of what DTRIP is and also just what you do within DTRIP?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. So the DTRIP, DCCC, we go by many different names. We're the official campaign arm for the Democrats in the House of Representatives. And so we are the only political committee in the country whose principal mission is to support Democratic candidates every step of the way, from recruitment of the candidates to run in the districts across the country, to helping them support and staff up their campaigns, and then helping them with re-election once they win in November. And so we kind of run all the digital communications, the research, the ads, the media polling, and of course the organizing for the campaigns across the country at the House level. And so I'm on the organizing team, and so we kind of have split it into two different teams this cycle of running in-district programming, which is going to do a lot of in-person relational and in-person canvassing, going door to door, versus my team is going to be handling the phones and the texting, and then the relational organizing that's outside of our targeted frontline and red and blue districts. But they're all going to kind of work together. We're going to be supporting all of our candidates across the country with helping with those phones and texts to make sure that we can be very, very useful with our capacity and not waste our resources, because we have a presidential going on and we can't waste our volunteer capacity. So yeah, that's kind of the short of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton more, but it's good to hear. And, you know, as organizers, we love synergy. We can't waste our capacity. So that makes a ton of sense. So kind of like you just mentioned, you know, you're doing the phones, you're doing the banks, the texts, you're doing it all. And of course, we as VSA are going to be taking action with y'all at kind of like every level this cycle. But, you know, of course, you know, this relational piece to your distributed program is a big piece of it, right? So why would you say relational was really important for DTRIP to incorporate, important for their success, your success, and, you know, just in general, why are we even talking about relational organizing, right?
Yeah, so I think starting with the piece of why we're talking about relational organizing, I think it's actually really relevant to the conversations you all just had around personal story, and like how effective that is for when you are door knocking or when you are on the phones talking to someone to get them to relate. Relational is kind of like pivoting that of like, what if you didn't have to convince someone or like introduce them to why they should care about you and your story, but because they already know you from life. They're either your brother, your father, they're your kid, or like they're your grandfather, whoever it is, or like maybe neighbor, someone you go to church with, whatever. Like, you don't need to convince them of who you are as a person to get them to relate and understand you. You can have that deep, intimate conversation about the issues that you care about, the things that you're worried about, the issues that they care about, and like get those issues to them, or the answers to them about different policies, or just why you're supporting X candidate. And so being able to break through that, like that kind of pivots into why it's really important for the DCCC's success this cycle, because as I mentioned, like it is a presidential cycle this year. And so because it's presidential, turnout is going to be increased because Democrats have a majority of voter registration versus Republicans. But where we're not at an advantage, at least on the House side, is that so much of the ad space and so much of the messaging space is going to be around either the presidential or from super PACs or from really top tier Senate campaigns. And so we're kind of going to be very drowned out in terms of the media and the ads that we're able to place to get people to, on a broad level, know who we are, what we're fighting for, and like what messages we're trying to get across to people. And so relational is going to be a really great thing to break through all that noise, to have those one-on-one conversations and get people to understand what's happening at the state and local level or the congressional level. I don't need to talk much about ad season. I'm sure for any of you who are in Maryland, you just had the Trone ads. I even got them here in DC, or the New Yorkers here, the New York 3 special election that happened in February. Like, you know how difficult it is to just see anything else that is not that one particular race. And so, yeah, relational breaks through that, and like it gets you to be the trusted messenger, gets those messages across. And also, I think like the second part is on top of this, so many of you have like done the important work of texting, dialing, and like knocking, and that that we don't have 100% contact rate, and far below like 15% is considered good. And so consider like if I was to call my grandma, like I don't think I would have a 15% contact rate or success rate of when I called her. At least I don't hope I would. Like it should probably be closer to 90 or 100%. And like I'm able to have that conversation with her much easier and like to a much higher degree than like a volunteer that doesn't know her is able to talk like, yes, personal story, but like I'm able to like have a much more real conversation. And so that's the part that we're really trying to get through of how do we have these real conversations and get someone to really, really dive and commit to a candidate they might not have heard a ton about. And that's all going to be through relational organizing.
Yeah, that's how we're going to reach them, right? So you kind of just mentioned this. Maybe we're talking to our grandmas, who knows? But with these, congressional races, they're often won by some margins. We've talked about this earlier, but when it comes to types of voters in our lives, obviously with your program, it's going to be a specific difference, but who is important that we should be targeting to make up these margins? Is it just everybody? What do you think?
Yeah, so I have two answers to this where like one is everybody is important to talk to, but I think more important than like just everybody, it's more like people who will listen. Like someone that will respect you and your opinion and your points of view and like actually want to have a legitimate conversation with you. Like organizing is hard. You all know from like talking to people over the phone or in person, like, especially people you don't know, like it can be kind of daunting, but like, it's also kind of a different type of daunting to talk to someone who you do know and have a relationship with and will have a relationship afterwards. Like trust yourself and like trust, if you think this is going to be a worthwhile conversation, like you can kind of float around the edges and see if there's movement going there. But like, I really do think like everyone who will listen and have a real conversation and respect you as a person, that's someone who's worthwhile to talk to, because you can find a lot of people who are on the outer skirts of like Republicans who will have this niche issue that you can break through and like actually convince them and change their worldview on. I've seen it time and time again. But to go really specific of who is going to be really pivotal to be thinking about, like young people in particular who are extremely transient and like can't be targeted by mail or ads because they're not registered to vote at their current address. Working class people who are maybe not always available to answer the phone or answer the door and like have conversations with you all, like volunteers, or people of color who are rightly and justly like don't trust the political system because it has not taken care of them or their needs. Like we have to be really thinking of like how we can communicate with a bunch of people about just issues and like the future and like hope and optimism. Like that's what we as a party is solutions, hope, and optimism. Like I think if we flip the House back, we keep the Senate, and we have Joe Biden solo as president, like so much is going to be better. And we're like on that precipice, and it's just we're right there. Like that's the hope we need to get to people, and like I think that's the message that you all can convey through Relational.
Definitely, yeah. Hope, guys. We have it. I do. Okay, so let's wrap up. We're a little over time, but we're having a nice time. Whatever. But we had introduced Relational in a framework more along the lines of something that can be just like threaded into every part, into every breath of action that we take. But of course, when you scale anything like that up, kind of like what you will be doing with y'all's Relational program, what do you have planned? Obviously, we're going to be sharing all of the details with our volunteers, but if you want to give a quick little plug overview for it.
Yeah, of course. So Relational is still going to be built into everything we do because like I mentioned earlier, we are very limited in terms of the time and resources. Like we can't call everyone all the time. We can't text everyone all the time. Like we have to lean into you all, me, to have conversations with people. And so in districts where we have staff, we're going to be holding house parties where people relationally organize their neighborhoods. They do like in-person friend banking. We're going to be going to events like farmers markets, or when we talk to someone at the doors, like we're going to be marking them through the Reach app and logging that conversation for the campaign that will remove them from the universe of people that we want to call or text or knock in the future. Like it's all going to be very system oriented of like, if you mark someone in our Reach app as like, this person is voting for whatever candidate, it's like, great, we don't need to talk to them. Like we don't need to waste our time texting them, calling them, knocking on the door, because we trust that you have actually done that and that you can turn them out closer to November. Like we will give you more talking points, resources about when, where, how they can vote, regardless of what their state is. Maybe it's a vote by mail state, maybe it's they have early voting, whatever. We'll give you that information. Like we don't need to talk to them in May, June, July, because you already have. And so that it doesn't like just stop there. It's like we're going to be using this on the distributed end to expand our reach across the country and like help candidates that are not just congressional, but also like our state and local, like our state Senate, our state House campaigns. Like we can have tags for all of these people, and we do have tags for all these people to say like, hey, you are also in a really pivotal and like important state Senate race, because we know how impactful these elections are, and like we can make sure people know what this looks like. We can help them with the voter registration. Like everything is just gonna be so integrated, but like the bigger piece is like it impacts the organizing that we do, and to make sure that we don't waste those efforts or duplicate. Like we want to trust you all in the conversations that you're having, or that you can be the conduit to turn them out, because you're going to be a better canvasser than I would be if I talked to your friend. And so, yeah, it's built into everything we do, and it's going to be a really, really cool program. And it's going to be the reason why we win in November. I'm really, really confident in that.
Hell yeah. I am also very confident in that as well. As well. We love Relational. Again, thank you so much, Trent, for joining us. We'll be in touch. You'll be seeing some friendly VSA faces in the future. But yeah, we'll see you later. Have a good one. Oops. Okay, guys, we are almost done. I know we're a little over. Stick around. We have a couple other things we need to share with you. So again, you'll get an opportunity to sign up for all of DCCC's stuff. But for now, VSA has put together an evergreen little relational resource that you can always access on our website. The link is votesaveamerica.com/relational. There's a resource. There's also a worksheet to kind of help you map your networks. And we're going to need y'all to access that, because guess what? We only have half the number of people signed up for training number 2 and training number 3 that signed up for this one. So we need y'all to really flex your relational recruitment power and help us recruit for next week. And we're going to make it even more fun. It's going to be a competition between East and West for those who are involved, and everyone here should be. So join your team, recruit for the training. You can see this RSVP link below me, /training, votesaveamerica.com/training. The competition is going to be held in Slack, so I hope to see you all there. Again, I know it's a lot of links, but once you're in Slack, guys, I promise that's where you're going to find all the good stuff. But yeah, so we're going to have a competition. We're going to see who can recruit the most amount of friends and family and pals and neighbors and everybody to join us for the training series, and also just to organize or else, because I think we have a pretty good time. All right, it's time. I know we're a few over, but I think it was worth it every minute. We have a final couple of asks for you, as we always do. Obviously, you know, this is serious business, guys. Of course, join your team on Slack, recruit for next week, help your team win that recruitment relational challenge that we just dropped for fun. But don't forget why we're here. We're here to organize. We're here to volunteer. So sign up to take action. I'm assuming all of us are already in the program. You've signed up. You maybe got an email or two. You're going to get a weekly email tomorrow morning. Check your spam. But if you're not wanting to check your email, again, join Slack, because you will get those weekly actions, but you're also going to get a ton of other opportunities that might work better for your schedule, right? So join us, sign up for a training, an action. I need to see y'all at a phone bank or a Canvas or a text bank or something. I know the training series isn't over, but there's still a ton of stuff to do while we get trained up. So that's it for us. We need you to take action, and I know you will, but I'm just making sure you do. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of training 1. We're going to see y'all next week, next Tuesday. Don't forget, after Memorial Day, don't go to sleep. We'll be here, same time, same place. We're going to have these living on YouTube the whole time. So take a look again, and we will see y'all later. Have a good rest of your night. Bye.